Welcome to the Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything podcast, where we expose the globalists' sinister plans to collapse society so they can build a new world order upon the ashes. This is where we shine the light, expose the darkness, and push back against these evil tyrants. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is where we analyze facts hiding in plain sight. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hi folks, I'm Allan Paul Roberts, author of the new book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. And I want to welcome you to the first episode of my brand new podcast, aptly titled, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to embark on what for many will be an eye-opening journey that will challenge your beliefs about how the world works and how dangerously close we are to the collapse of everything we take for granted in America and throughout the Western world. I want to begin today by asking you a few questions. Do you think the world may be heading for a cliff? Have you ever thought about why the challenges we face here in the U.S. are so similar to what the people are facing throughout the UK, European Union, Canada, and Australia, including things like mass migration, rising crime, and the soaring cost of food, housing, energy, insurance, and medical care? Have you noticed that governments and the banking and financial systems worldwide are teetering on the brink of insolvency? And why is freedom declining, privacy being eliminated, and heavy-handed government on the rise in many of the freedom-loving countries of the Western world, especially in Europe? Why is so much unrest being fomented against those trying to bring law and order to our cities? Why is the war in Ukraine so hard to resolve, despite the best efforts of our U.S. diplomats? Is there a master plan behind it all? Or is that a foolish conspiracy theory? I'm convinced that the evidence for a master plan is inescapable, and we'll expose that evidence right here in this 12-part series. In this series, we'll discuss who the globalists are, what they are trying to achieve, what they've accomplished so far, and their possible next moves. In future episodes, we'll discover how we can push back and revitalize our communities and our nation. My book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order, will serve as the framework for our journey. You can check it out at globalcollapsebook.com. We'll examine the evidence that the globalists are attacking 11 critical pillars of Western society in an effort to collapse them before building a new world order upon the ashes of the fallen societies of the free world. The 11 pillars are national borders, security and police protection, privacy, banking and finance, education, energy, environment, medical system, food supply, self-identity, and lastly, faith. I believe that, like me, once you see the evidence for the intentional collapse of society, you won't be able to unsee it. So join me as we pull the curtain on the deceptions and schemes hiding in plain view for decades. Learning the truth is the first step in regaining our freedom. The journey to truth begins right here, right now. But before we dive in, I want to tell you a little bit about my background so that you can get to know me and decide if you want to trust what I'm telling you. So I want to begin by telling you about my experience in the corporate world, which goes back about 3 decades before becoming an author. I started as an IT consultant in a company specializing in developing custom manufacturing software. I led a team of developers to create a custom integrated business management system for a mid-sized company in a niche industry. By the way, that software was used for 25 years until that business went out of business during the COVID lockdown. In another job, I was vice president of operations for a manufacturing company, My role was to implement new manufacturing technologies for an industry-leading mid-sized company to help them lower their cost, speed the production flow, and deliver goods more quickly to their customers. However, when NAFTA came in, I felt I had no choice but to establish secondary production facilities in Central America, or risk that company going out of business if our competitors learned to outsource and lower their costs before we did. So I saw firsthand the impact of the deindustrialization of America as manufacturing jobs moved to Mexico and other countries, but I was powerless to stop it. Within about a 50-mile radius of our company at the time, we had dozens of subcontractors who went out of business as companies began outsourcing more and more of their subcontracting to Mexico and the other NAFTA countries. Years later, I became the VP of International Sales and Marketing at another mid-sized company that was a leader in its field. While there, I developed a worldwide sales and marketing team spanning 30 countries, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, Mexico, the UK, and nearly all of Western Europe. This resulted in 7 years of explosive international sales growth of 20% or more annually. In 2011, I finally left the corporate world, started my own marketing firm catering to small and mid-sized businesses, and that's what I've been doing ever since, right up until the time I became an author in 2024. I'm explaining all this to get to an important question. Why would a busy guy like me, who is running a small business, take the time to write a book like this? Well, the truth is, I wasn't planning to write a book. That was the last thing on my mind. But something happened last year in 2024 that really left me with no choice. Here's how it went down. I woke up one morning in late April 2024 around 4 a.m. Had no dreams, no nightmares, nothing unusual. After a minute or so, I had a sudden flash of 6 pillars of American society that were methodically being worked on to take them down, and they were in danger of collapsing. What was incredible was that I was able to perceive all 6 of these pillars of society simultaneously and with an indescribable clarity. I had no vision, I heard no voice. It was just an instant knowing that was clearer than any knowledge I ever had about anything. I did not know what was being done to take down each of these pillars of society, but I just knew that they were being worked on to bring them down and that they were in real danger of collapsing. So, bewildered, I got up, I wrote them down, and went back to bed. After a few minutes, I had another flash, 3 more, 3 different pillars of society, again, in danger of collapsing. So I wrote them down. Went back to bed one more time. Within a few minutes, I had 2 more, again, a flash. At this point, I jumped out of bed, and I'm thinking, what is happening to me? And I even, in my mind, said, God, what is happening? Because I thought it had to be a God thing. So why do I say that? Well, for about 20 years now, I've had 30 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour and a half of prayer as my first thing in my daily routine every day. So we're talking 20 plus years. And when you're in that mode of taking that time, you sort of get to know when God is revealing something to you. Usually it's subtle. Forgive a friend, help someone, make up with someone you've offended, do something for your wife, whatever it might be. You could say maybe this is just your conscience, but it is kind of like a subtle nudge. I call it the God nudge. But I never had anything close to what I experienced with these 11 pillars of society and this instant knowledge. So when this happened, I'm thinking, why, God, why are you showing me this? Do you want me to write a book? And if you want me to write a book, what's the title? And as I asked that question in my mind, what's the title? I had an instant flash of the entire title, the long title, The Globalists Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. Now, that appeared again like in a flash with total clarity. And there was not even any time between the first word and the last word. I just knew it front to back. So this was what I would call a truth bomb of a title. It's not a title I would have picked. It seems too bold. It might scare people away. But as I was thinking about this, I felt that this revelation was so strong and clear that I really don't have a choice. If you really feel like the Lord is asking you to do something, there's only one answer, and that's yes. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And about a minute later, I got really bad butterflies. It's like, how am I going to do this? And, I have an MBA. I graduated near the top of my class during my MBA. And so I've written, maybe 100-page master's thesis back in the day. And that was, decades ago. But I've never written a book. So I had these butterflies and I just said, God, how am I going to do this? And I just sensed this reply like it was waiting for the question. And it went like this: write it from the heart and it will flow. So I found that to be like a huge relief. And so I kind of let go. I let go of my normal tendency to plan right down to the last detail. My IT background, my software development, my experience with manufacturing systems, all the detail that goes with that line of work. I just let it all go. And I committed to, no excessive planning, no outlining, nothing like that. But now at this point, after three sets of revelations of these 11 collapse points in total, there was no going back to bed. And it might have been 4:30 in the morning at this time, something like that. I went downstairs, made a cup of coffee, grabbed my tablet and pen, and I'm sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out how I'm going to carve out the time in my life to write a book, and just jotting down some notes. A couple hours later, hour and a half later, my wife comes down the steps, walks into the kitchen, and I said, "You're not going to believe what just happened to me," and told her the whole thing. And she's like, "Yeah, I totally believe it. When do you want to get started? You need to carve out some time. You need to go away to the beach or the mountains. What do you want to do?" So we ended up going to the beach, booked 8 nights there to kind of kick off the project. I researched and wrote all day, every day for 8 days from morning till night. I mean, we went out to breakfast, we went out to dinner, everything in between, and up until maybe 11 o'clock at night, I was just writing and researching. So that gave me a good start. And then that was mid-May, May 17th. We started the 8 nights. And then when we got home from the beach, every weekend, all weekend, the same thing, Saturday morning till Sunday night, 11 p.m., something like that, and just researching and writing every spare minute I could get. Lots of evening nights during the summer, and finished it up on September 3rd of 2024. So all in all, that was about 3.5 months to research and write about 300 pages. So that is very quick, but the promise, I guess you could say, that it would flow, I found to be totally true. So that's how this whole thing got started, and that's the reason for the journey that you're on with me today. I'm Allan Paul Roberts. Let's jump into the journey of the globalist plan to collapse everything to usher in a new world order. So I want to begin by reading the dedication to the book. And don't worry, this is super quick. It's probably one of the shortest dedications you've ever read in a book. It's short, but if you think about it, I think it says a lot. So here it is. To those who speak the truth at great personal cost, and to all who face evil unflinchingly, you are my inspiration. So who am I talking about? Well, we all know people who have taken a hit for what they believe, and they didn't complain about it. And we pretty much all know somebody like this. People who just won't yield to fear. They won't bow down to intimidation. The Bible's filled with stories of brave individuals who refuse to compromise their principles or their faith to satisfy the twisted demands of evil tyrants. My personal favorite is from the book of Daniel, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were ordered to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue made in his image, or be burned alive in the fiery furnace that was already white hot and ready to consume anyone who denied the king's proclamation to worship his statue. Their reply inspires me to this day. I'm paraphrasing here, but it goes something like this. Our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, know this, O king, we will not bow down to your stinking golden statue. Okay, maybe they didn't say stinking, but they implied it. I have a modern-day example for you. It's not as dramatic as the Bible story. His life was not threatened, but his freedom certainly was. I'm talking about Peter Navarro, the director of the White House National Trade Council and assistant to the president during Trump's first term. Navarro was subpoenaed by the J6 committee. Many would argue that was an unlawful committee that did not follow the rules for how such committees are to be formed, with each side selecting its own members. Instead, Nancy Pelosi appointed the Republican members, selecting rhinos who were known Trump haters. So this was not a search for the truth, it was a setup. Navarro refused to appear before the committee to answer their questions, claiming executive privilege as a former advisor to the president, something countless Democrat and Republican advisors to presidents in similar positions have done in the past without incident. Navarro was later arrested at an airport and placed in handcuffs and leg irons, even though he lived close to the FBI office from which they could easily have arrested him at home without the fanfare and the public humiliation. So all this was done to intimidate him and to act as a warning to others. This was done to try to break him. Navarro never flinched, never gave in to their illegal demands, never complained, and he paid a great price. He spent 4 months in prison. So let this be a reminder to anyone who decides to stand on principle that there may be a price to pay. The bravest among us are those who are willing to pay it. Again, I'm Allan Paul Roberts, and we're discussing the globalist plan to collapse everything. You can learn more about the book, order a signed copy, and read a chapter for free at globalcollapsebook.com. Next up, I want to read the introduction to my book because it describes the current state of our society in terms of the various levels of awareness people have of what we're facing here in the U.S. and throughout the Western world. As I read it, I want you to ask yourself which one of these 3 types of people best describes you at this moment. Just a reminder that this was written last summer during the final months of the prior administration. So here we go. I want you to picture this as I'm reading it. The world is speeding toward a cliff, yet, like infants asleep in the back seat, many are blissfully unaware of the great dangers just ahead. Others have a gnawing sense that something isn't quite right, but they cannot describe it. They are tense and cautious, as one would be when entering a dark home at night, after realizing the front door was left unlocked. Outwardly, they act as if all is well, but internally, they are on alert. There are some, though, who are well informed and therefore intensely aware of the dangers, deceptions, and decline all around, from the vacant big box stores to rampant inflation, rising crime, and the wide open southern border. To them, it feels as if the adults have left the room and are out partying, while thieves and criminals watch from a distance and plan their moves. They are perplexed as to why news sources they once trusted seem to be ignoring virtually everything that matters and focusing on the petty things that don't. Inside, they are screaming, "Wake up!" as the world around them seems trapped in a dream, sleepwalking toward destruction. This book is a wake-up call for the first group, an affirmation and a warning for the second, and a resource for all three. My hope is that it will help make sense of the world, provide a framework to anticipate where things are heading, and illuminate what we need to do right now to protect ourselves and those we love. Finally, I hope it ignites a fierce awakening. Let's turn that car around. Okay, so which group are you currently in? Are you blissfully unaware of what is going on behind the scenes? Or do you have a gnawing sense that something's off, but you just don't know what it is? Or are you intensely aware of the dangers, deceptions, and decline in the world, not only here in America, but in places like Europe, Canada, and Australia, among others? Regardless of which group you belong to, you're going to find answers in this 12-part series. So, like many whose eyes have been opened, I came to my current awareness of the state of the world reluctantly. I call myself a reluctant skeptic. Here's what I mean. Depending on your age, you can look back to a time when most people had great faith in America and identified strongly with the principles and values contained in the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution. Most firmly believed in the virtue of American ideals, flowing from a Constitution that recognized the inalienable rights given to man by his Creator, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the sacredness of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, and the value of a limited government that stays out of our business. They believe that our nation fights just wars to free the oppressed from tyrants and dictators. If you're like me, you grew up loving America. You felt a wave of devotion and gratitude for your country when the national anthem was sung at national sporting events as Air Force jets roared overhead. You valued the fact that America led the world in innovation as a result of the freedoms we enjoy. You felt that most of our leaders were good people who wanted to reduce crime, grow the economy, and make life better for everyone. And you trusted the legal system to get to the truth. You believed that anything was possible in America. That was essentially my attitude. America, land of the free, home of the brave, land of endless opportunity, bedrock of freedom, inspiration for the rest of the world. And I still believe that the American people, for the most part, cherish those ideals. But sadly, I no longer believe that most of our leaders want the best for America or are willing to fight to preserve it, as our founders and fellow patriots once did. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite. The evidence suggests that many of our leaders are cooperating with the globalists to achieve the downfall of America and the free regions of the developed world, including Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and others. Many seem afraid to speak out against the outrageous acts of sabotage being unleashed against the free world by the elites in power. I was a skeptic at first. Like most of us, my worldview was affected by normalcy bias, which causes us to assume that because certain things never occurred in our personal past, they will never occur in the future. And why would they? We've known nothing but stability, prosperity, and freedom in America since the end of World War II. So why would things ever change? The people who suffered under Hitler were also victims of normalcy bias, until things got so bad that they could no longer deny his evil plans to exterminate the Jews, crush freedom, and dominate the world. I didn't, and I still do not want to believe things are as bad as they are, but I'm no longer willing to dismiss the evidence. I refuse to stay silent and mind my own business as I watch the country I love collapse around me. We deserve better. Our children and grandchildren deserve better. If we are willing to set aside our normalcy bias and stare clear-eyed at the threats we face, then we can work together to avoid them, or at least minimize them. That's what the book is about. So join me in this 12-part series as we reveal the evidence of systematic efforts by the globalists to usher in a new world order by first collapsing the critical systems, knowledge, and beliefs needed to support a complex, free society, including borders, security and police protection, privacy, banking and finance, education, energy, environment, medical system, food supply, self-identity, and faith. Let's talk about the globalist philosophy and their goals. The first step in learning about what the globalists are trying to achieve is to forget what you think you know. Forget your pet theories or biases about how the world works, long-held beliefs, our upbringing, education, and culture. All of these can actually form a blockade to the truth. It's not easy, but it's important that we set aside our normal way of thinking. For example, consider the shocking statements of two CIA directors and what they reveal about their goals. Then consider how we've been manipulated for decades. The first is William Casey, CIA director from 1981 to 87. He said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." And just in case you think that's a one-off CIA director that went off the rails, here's another one, William Colby, 1973 to 76. He said, "The Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media." Folks, we've been played. It turns out the CIA has been manipulating the mainstream media for decades. And so we're all victims of misinformation handed down by a controlled mainstream press, not a free press for the most part. Success has been defined as achieving deception over the American people, and they've accomplished it to a great degree by their control of the major media. Let's talk about one of the greatest deceptions of our time, the handling of the COVID crisis, in what I believe was an intentional deception and intimidation campaign led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, during which the major media was in lockstep with the misinformation he was peddling. Dr. Fauci was the White House's chief medical advisor and the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. He famously claimed to be the science. Fauci on one occasion spoke the truth in noting that there was no point in wearing masks because they don't prevent the spread of viruses. On another occasion, he told us to wear one mask, then two masks, and even to wear a mask outdoors. Check out these two quick videos. Here's the first one. Fauci, masks don't work. This is dated July 2, 2020.
No reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
Here's another one. Fauci, wear a mask. This video is dated May 12, 2020.
The recommendation was made, I believe it was Dr. Redfield at the CDC who first said that, about getting some sort of a covering. We don't want to call it a mask because back then we were concerned we would be taking masks away from the healthcare providers. But some sort of mask-like facial covering, I think for the time being, should be a very regular part of how we prevent the spread of infection. And in fact, the more and more as you go outside, right here and where I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., you can see many people out there with masks on, which gives me some degree of comfort that people are taking this very seriously.
And yet, we have photos that show him seated in a stadium, unmasked, during the pandemic, shoulder to shoulder, with people to his left and right. For our radio listeners, I'm displaying the photo of Fauci at the event. This leads us to the obvious question. Is Fauci a truth teller or a fraud? Did he really believe what he was telling us? Or was he manipulating us by changing his narrative to serve his goals? For a person with his level of knowledge, this is beyond sloppy. In my opinion, it's manipulative and deceptive. But this is far from the first time that fake science has been used to manipulate public perceptions. Case in point, Al Gore and the global warming deception. It turns out that Gore's An Inconvenient Truth 2006 documentary backfired spectacularly in terms of his predictions. Daniel Barker from Natural News tested some of Gore's 2006 predictions 10 years later, well after the time for their fulfillment had come and gone. His perfectly titled 2016 article, 10 years later, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth propaganda film turns out to be total bunk. How is his profit from carbon taxes not criminal fraud? That title sums it up well. Contrary to Gore's 2006 claims, the Arctic didn't melt by 2016. By 2014, it was thicker and covered a greater area than in 2006. Polar bears were not harmed by so-called climate change. On the contrary, they were thriving. Canadian scientists found, quote, no evidence to support the claim. Kilimanjaro was not snow-free. Ecologists monitoring its snowpack found that it may have shrunk a little, but were confident that it would be there for the foreseeable future. And storms were not occurring more often, nor at higher intensities. In 2013, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change stated there is, quote, limited evidence of changes in extremes associated with other climate variables, unquote, since the mid-20th century. The article goes on to point out that Gore amassed a fortune by pushing his climate change myths. His net worth in 2007, after leaving office as VP, was $700,000. By 2015, just 8 years later, it had ballooned to $172.5 million by way of his environmental activism, which is an eye-popping 246 times his 2007 wealth. Who knew that baseless, unscientific fear-mongering could be so profitable? So what's the bottom line here? Number one, we need to develop a healthy skepticism to any fear-based narrative being fed to us by big media, big government, and big business, especially when two or more of those entities are pushing the exact same narrative. Again, recall the words of CIA directors William Casey and William Colby. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. And the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media. Deception is a key requirement for the globalists. If the masses were to become fully aware of their plans, then it will become much harder for them to achieve their goals. Speaking of deception, let's talk about the dishonest media and media manipulation. We don't have the time to get into all the details on this show, but if you pay attention, it's obvious that most of the mainstream press has been captured, and they are not fulfilling our founders' vision of an objective free press responsible for holding those in power accountable. Instead, they have taken sides. Most big news outlets are spreading opinions and misinformation instead of speaking facts. But it didn't used to be this way. I'm old enough to recall a time when college was a mind-expanding adventure in learning how to study and appreciate all sides of an argument. Doing so was considered essential to developing critical thinking skills and to obtaining true knowledge. Both liberal and conservative points of view were tolerated back then. It would have been unthinkable to prevent a popular conservative from speaking on campus. In fact, a person who refused to hear both sides of an argument was considered uneducated, ignorant, and small-minded. I'm not sure exactly when all that began to change, but it certainly accelerated when Donald Trump first came into office. In the prior 8-year Obama administration, it seemed like the so-called free press was asleep at the switch. Rarely was Obama challenged by the mainstream media in any meaningful way. To do so was taboo, and an honest reporter was in danger of being labeled, gasp, a conspiracy theorist or a racist. Sadly, it seems that most political reporters became spineless jellyfish during the Obama administration. But once Trump came into office, the media snapped to attention. The verbal onslaught began. Trump was attacked at every press conference, and they continued to challenge him long after leaving office. But when Biden came into office, I should say, they once again flipped tactics and became nice little journalists for their globalist puppet masters. I believe what we've been witnessing since 2008 is truly the most amazing transformation since the free press was first established by our founders. Who would have thought the mainstream press could ever become so completely and shamelessly subdued? Yes, folks, the press has been captured. Never before in the media in the U.S. have we been so corrupt and controlled. The mockingbird media is truly an apt description for what they have become. Manipulators who work in tandem to communicate the message they have been given by their handlers, and therefore they cannot be trusted. What we are witnessing, with very few exceptions, is a captured mainstream press, not a free press. So how can we protect ourselves against their constant attempt to manipulate us by controlling the narrative? Here are 4 key indicators of media manipulation to watch for. Number 1, watch who they demonize. Their enemy may actually be your friend. 2, be highly suspicious whenever they pile on and repeat the same narrative over and over from multiple sources, especially when they use the exact same language. 3, be alert to their use of buzzwords to demonize others in order to shut down dissent and discussion, including words like racist, insurrectionist, homophobe, Islamophobe, xenophobe, anti-Semitic, conspiracy theorist, extreme right-wing, white nationalist, climate denier, election denier, toxic masculinity. You get the point. Number 4, be especially wary whenever they push ideas that are patently false or absurd, yet they say them with a straight face because they think we're stupid. Things like, men can have babies. A man who self-identifies as a woman should be able to compete in women's sports. And the 2020 election was the most secure in history, despite what we know about ballot boxes, mail-in ballots, and everything else. If they can get you to accept things like this in the face of abundant evidence to the contrary, then you're suffering from the worst kind of media abuse, groupthink, and mind control, reminiscent of Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984. So instead of succumbing to groupthink, here's a novel idea. Let's try to hear each other out and explore all sides of an issue. Shut no one down, yet accept nothing without honest questioning. Think critically. Include alternative news media sources in your research. Above all, resist those who attempt to manipulate you. 1984 no more, folks. 1984 no more. I want to talk about today's free press. The only solution to escaping manipulation of information by governments and their partners in the controlled media and in globalist corporations and organizations is a free press. And with very few exceptions, we're not going to find that in the mainstream media. And that includes the so-called fact checkers like Snopes, PolitiFact, FactCheck.org, Good Information Inc., and others, many of which are funded by George Soros and other globalists and globalist non-governmental organizations, whose goal is to deceive and manipulate us. Our founders knew that a free press would be vital to the survival of a constitutional republic, and so they enshrined it in the Constitution. Today, a truly free press exists only within the alternative media which are not owned or controlled by the globalists. The alternative news media is the free press, and many in the alternative media are waging guerrilla warfare against false information narratives in an attempt to get the truth out to the American people and to the world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every alternative news source is accurate or trustworthy, but I am saying that they are free to speak their mind because they are not owned by the mainstream press, and they are worth checking out. There are literally thousands of alternative news sources sharing real news and original opinion via podcasts, videos, radio, and websites. Many are made up of only a handful of dedicated journalists, sometimes just a single person. Many operate on tiny budgets, supported by advertising from small companies. As John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. So are the alternative media. By the way, you can find several pages of some of my favorite alternative media news sources in my book, which again, you can find at globalcollapsebook.com. Well, friends, no discussion about the globalist plan to collapse everything would be complete without a discussion of things like what is globalism, who are the globalists, and what are their goals. I hope you're willing to consider my prior suggestion to forget what you know, to take that to heart, so that you can be open to information that you may be tempted to dismiss out of hand. Otherwise, I may lose you here. We're going to start with a discussion about globalism. What is it? I'm not referring to the benign aspects of globalism, such as global trade across national borders, or students studying abroad, or even some economically controversial issues such as moving U.S. factories offshore. Instead, I'm taking issue with the globalist philosophy, belief system, plans, and actions designed to collapse the current systems and freedoms we rely on to support our way of life, so they can build what they call a new world order upon the ashes of our fallen society. Included in their vision of the future is the shocking and arrogant claim from 2020 that the elites documented on their World Economic Forum website, stating, "It's 2030, you'll own nothing, and you'll be happy," which really means the globalists will own everything, we'll rent everything from them, and you and I will lose our freedom to a degree we never thought possible. If they get their way, they may be ecstatic, but we will definitely not be happy. 2030 is their target. We would be wise to take them seriously. I want to talk about Build Back Better, the Great Reset, and Agenda 2030. The globalist dystopic vision of the future, which they refer to as the Great Reset, is supported by certain goals within UN Agenda 2030. The phrases Build Back Better and Build It Back Better are shorthand for the Great Reset, which makes sense if you understand that in order to have a reset, the old system must first be demolished in order to build it back better. Significantly, Build Back Better was Biden's 2020 presidential campaign theme. This was no coincidence. By choosing a slogan associated with the globalist agenda, the Biden administration was signaling their fellow globalist leaders that their campaign goals and plans for the future administration were in harmony with that destructive agenda. Here is a powerful example of the globalist control over key political leaders from various countries. In this astonishing video, you'll hear globalist leaders from the U.S. and around the world parroting the phrases "Build Back Better" and "Build It Back Better." These political leaders are in mindless lockstep with one another, which would be funny if it weren't so ominous. They think they are cleverly signaling their fellow leaders that they are on board with the plan to tear down the system, when in reality, they are also being exposed for the globalist pawns that they are. Check out this video, Build Back Better compilation of world leaders speaking in lockstep.
It's a very pertinent question to ask, how do we build back better?
To build back better or whatever.
We have a chance to reset the clock and build back better than before.
To build back better than before.
Remember the
the terrible damage of COVID as we try to build back from this global pandemic.
Joe Biden calls it Build Back Better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
To do things differently, to build back better.
We're going to build it back better.
And build it back better.
It's my plan to build back better.
Start taking all the problems that have been created in education and mental health and start to build back in a positive way.
I have launched a booklet called Build Back Better, Britain After Coronavirus.
It's about building this country back better.
Growing conspiracy following it. It is called the Great Reset.
An unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset the ways in which we live.
The great opportunity for reset.
The theory even calls Mr. Biden's campaign slogan, Build Back Better, a front for the conspiracy.
Build back better.
Building back better our economy.
Build back better.
All elements of the Great Reset are fundamental to building the future we need.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
It's a big effort to, some would say, to build back better. We would say to really have a great reset.
Conspiracy, conspiracy.
Conspiracy.
It's important to understand that under their Great Reset plan to build back better, the masses will be kept on a very tight leash. They will have no wealth and no significant possessions of their own, and will be living under severe travel restrictions and many other tyrannical conditions. Rational, freedom-loving individuals would never accept many of the underlying goals of Agenda 2030 for themselves or their families. The 2020 video produced by the World Economic Forum includes a few clues of what they have planned for us by 2030. Here's some of the things they say. You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy. Whatever you want, you'll rent. The U.S. won't be the world's leading superpower. You'll eat much less meat, an occasional treat, not a staple. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. We'll have to do a much better job of welcoming and integrating refugees. There will be a global price on carbon. This will help make fossil fuels history. And Western values will have been tested to the breaking point. That video was produced in 2020. It's 2025. We're halfway to 2030. Let's take stock of their progress toward their 2030 goals. We'll take the first one. You'll own nothing, and whatever you want, you'll rent. Already a smaller percentage of society owns a home versus renting an apartment. Owning is now 37 to 40% more expensive than renting in most metro areas. The median age for a first-time home buyer in 2020 was 33 years old. Today in 2025, it is 40, an all-time high. Today's average first-time buyer at age 40 is as close in age to early Social Security eligibility at age 62 as to high school graduation at age 18. What about cars? They're getting harder to own. The 60-day delinquency rate on car loans is up about half versus 2019. Car prices are up by about 50% as well since 2020, and loan rates are much higher. Let's take another one. The U.S. won't be the world's leading superpower. What actions were taken to back that up? Well, first of all, Biden left $7.2 billion in high-tech military equipment in Afghanistan during that disastrous withdrawal. We're talking about 78 aircraft, including Black Hawk helicopters and A-29 attack planes, 40,000 vehicles, 300,000 rifles and machine guns, $2 billion in communications equipment, night vision, and other specialized gear. That's equipment that's no longer in the U.S. arsenal. And then we have the foolish war in Ukraine, which has seriously reduced the U.S. arsenal as well. The U.S. arsenal is now critically low in 5 to 7 key systems that are vital for high-intensity conflict. Depletion has harmed U.S. readiness for other theaters like the Indo-Pacific or the China theater, with some stockpiles at 25 to 33% of required levels for war plans, according to The Guardian. China is projected to have the largest, most modern navy by 2030. A prolonged war would favor China's ability to replace losses 200 times faster than we can today in the U.S. So revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding is now a national emergency. Let's take another one. You'll eat much less meat. Today, the average steak costs 40 to 70% more per pound than it did in 2019. Most people are already eating less meat as a result. And finally, 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. We'll have to do a much better job of welcoming and integrating refugees. So-called climate change is the excuse the globalists use to hide their plans that are being executed in real time. The European migration crisis began in 2010 and is raging to this day. Since then, 29 to 30 million migrants have entered the U.S. 55 to 60 million have entered Europe. 8 million have entered Australia, a country of only 22 million in 2010. The U.S., Europe, and Australia are all experiencing similar problems related to excessive migration, including rising crime, a loss of cultural identity, and stressed housing, medical, and school systems. This is all part of a top-down worldwide effort by the elites to collapse Western society. They want to make fossil fuels history. Think about the Green New Deal. Biden taking the Keystone XL pipeline offline on day one in office. Biden depleting 40% of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But Europe and Canada are in even worse shape due to their policies. The globalists are doing their best to weaken society by making energy more expensive and less reliable. Fortunately for the U.S., the current administration is working diligently to renew and fortify the U.S. energy supply. The globalists in their plans say that they want Western values to have been tested to the breaking point. That's their prediction. So think of the chaos in the biggest cities in the U.S., the U.K., and Western Europe. The out-of-control migration is leading to much higher crime, while at the same time, corrupt district attorneys are choosing not to prosecute shoplifting and violent crimes. The DEI programs in these countries are out of control, except that they are in decline in the U.S. thanks to the actions of the current administration, despite the globalists' best efforts to create chaos. They are actively pushing the Western world to a breaking point. But the stated goals of Agenda 2030 are just the beginning. What are the longer-term, higher-level goals of the globalists? Here are 8 of their goals that I believe pose the greatest threats to mankind, and I want to say up front that I get that to some, these may seem unbelievable. Goal number 1, a world government with centralized power over everything that matters. A single world government will replace individual nations in the globalist plan. People will live in a world without borders. Everyone will be a citizen of the world. As former Secretary of State John Kerry said to the graduating class of Northeastern University in 2016, quote, "You are about to graduate into a complex and borderless world," unquote. You have to ask why he would say that. It's because he's a globalist who's in on the plan for a borderless world with a one-world government. Under that plan, if nations exist, they will be in name only, and their leaders will be figureheads beholden to the world government. A single set of worldwide laws will replace national laws. The U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, therefore, would cease to exist. True democracy and representative government will be a thing of the past as national sovereignty is replaced by a single worldwide government. Goal number 2, the end of independent medicine and bodily autonomy. One set of medical guidelines and mandates will be enforced worldwide, including forced vaccinations and lockdowns justified by supposed pandemics. Does that sound hard to believe? Well, in 2023, the World Health Organization was seeking unilateral authority to declare a public emergency of international concern and to become the de facto governing body of all member states regarding pandemic response protocols. Fortunately, once again, Trump has withdrawn the U.S. from the mandates of the World Health Organization, so the U.S. is no longer under its influence. Although there has been significant pushback from many member states, the mere fact that the World Health Organization was seeking this level of authority is consistent with the globalist desire for top-down control. Goal number 3, a social credit system to control the masses. A social credit system, similar to the one currently operating in China, will be imposed on everyone in the globalist plan. Your social credit rating will impact things like your freedom of movement, access to credit and financial services, employment opportunities, access to education and healthcare, access to public services and amenities, and even your reputation and social standing. The fear of lowering your score will impact freedom of speech and expression. Your social credit rating will be impacted by your beliefs as determined by your social media activity, your political views, and even by what you purchase. Most importantly, the social credit system will be tied to a centrally controlled digital currency, which brings us to goal number 4, a programmable digital world currency. Under this system, cash will be eliminated, including both paper currency and coins. National currencies will eventually be replaced by a single worldwide programmable digital currency, also known as a central bank digital currency or CBDC. Because it's programmable, it will give those in charge the ability to electronically control your funds based on your social credit score and to turn off or reduce, i.e. steal, your digital money if you try to purchase things too much of certain things, or even just purchase certain items that they don't want you to have, such as meat or gas, or if you travel outside of your designated area. Goal number 5, 15-minute cities and travel restrictions. 15-minute cities, such as those currently being tested in Oxford, UK, and Melbourne, Australia, and more recently in portions of Mexico, will become the norm, in which everything you, quote, need will be in walking or biking distance. However, in the future, travel outside of these areas will be restricted. This is in line with the globalist stated goal of reducing fossil fuels like gas and diesel. With less gas comes less ability to travel, and if fossil fuels are eliminated, then travel can be even more tightly controlled. Check out this video. 15-minute cities are being rolled out in several places worldwide.
So why have you come here?
I've come here because I object to being told where I can and can't move in society. I think it's really unhealthy. I think that what's happened is post-pandemic, the powers that be in the government have got this desire to control our movement, our speech, everything, and I think it's really dangerous.
Goal number 6, enforced climate lockdowns. The authority to declare climate emergencies and to impose climate lockdowns will be at the sole discretion of the world government. For now, the plan is being tested in certain cities. The lockdown plans go hand in hand with the 15-minute cities. We've all lived through the abusive and manipulative COVID-19 lockdowns. And for what? Why should we trust an unaccountable World Health Organization with the power to lock down the world at will? This brings us to goal number 7, criminalizing religious speech and other forms of speech. Stating certain beliefs and making certain statements will be criminalized as hate speech by the world government if the globalists get their way. Censorship is the first step in this process, and it has grown exponentially in America, Europe, Canada, and Australia. It represents a serious threat to free speech, the free speech we've taken for granted since America's founding. However, criminalizing speech represents a major advancement in the march toward tyranny. And in the 2019 to 2020 time period, UK citizens charged with so-called hate speech received prison sentences in over 12% of cases. Look for the globalists to increase the pressure on this front, not only in Canada, Australia, and the UK, but ultimately in America as the precursor to implementing global speech policies tied to a social credit system. And finally, goal number 8, massive population reduction. If you're like me, then this is the most difficult goal to believe because it's so extreme and outside the bounds of human morality. This particular goal is hard to prove because the extent of the population reduction goals are rarely stated outright. However, globalist Ted Turner stated in a 1996 interview that, quote, a total population of 250 to 3 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal, unquote. At the time, the world population was about 5.8 billion. And as proof of his commitment to population reduction, he donated $1 billion to the UN population programs. That was in 1977. And his Turner Foundation spent millions annually on family planning and population stabilization projects. This is all consistent with sources claiming that the globalists plan to reduce the world population by as much as 90% or even more, from 8 billion to approximately 500 million. That 500 million target, by the way, was engraved on the mysterious Georgia Guidestones monument as an ideal population for the planet. Globalist Bill Gates also spoke of the benefits of population reduction in a 2010 TED Talk. In it, he infers that vaccines are an effective way to reduce the population. Think about that. Here he is saying the quiet part out loud. Check out this video.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Also, the globalist patriarch David Rockefeller was one of the most powerful globalists of our time, and he's captured on a video presenting a speech at the 1994 annual UN Ambassadors Dinner on the problem of global population. You can scan the QR code in my book to watch that video as well. The bottom line, folks, is that these globalists are serious about achieving depopulation, along with all the other goals I mentioned in this podcast. If you want to learn more about the globalist plan to collapse everything, be sure to check out my book at globalcollapsebook.com. I'm Allan Paul Roberts, and until next time, never give in, never give up, stand up for the truth, and push back against globalism.